Welcome back to Passionate World Talk Radio Network. Educate, enlighten, entertain. PWTRN is a wholly owned subsidiary of Global Media Network. Today on Lest We Forget -historical, we are again talking about secession, but instead of Texas, we're going to talk about California and the idea that they too should secede from the Union. And I'll be presenting two different sources, one from the United States and one from United Kingdom, the BBC. The first one is by Will Kenton, and he updated it on December 3rd, 2022. The terminology for California to secede from the Union is called Calexit, Calexit. And you're probably wondering, well, what is it, Lillian? Give us a definition. And Calexit loosely is the secession of California from the United States. It refers to the secession of the state California, after it secedes from the U.S., would become an independent country. The word means California exit, which is based on similar coinages such as Greece exit, Grexit, and bridge X, Brexit. And I'm sure we all remember Brexit, Brexit, because the United Kingdom pulled that from the international affairs of European countries not to do business with them anymore. The term came to the foreground in the wake of former President Trump's victory in 2016. And Hillary Clinton, a Democrat, won the state of California with 61% of the vote. It's not the state's independent vote. A Reuters poll, Reuters, R-E-U-T-E-R-S, poll published in January 2017 showed that 32% of Californians supported Calexit, up from 20% found in 2014. After the poll was published, a different Berkeley IGS poll released in March of 2017 found Californians opposed Calexit by more than 2-1. Calexit is being sponsored by Yes California, an independent campaign based on the state paying more in taxes than it receives for spending from the federal government and cultural differences. The campaign was placed, the initiative, on the 2019 state ballot, and it failed. Then on September 10th, 2020, a new effort was to collect petition signatures for the secession and renew it that way. So, who supports it? Since the organization has rebranded itself and dropped the term military annexation argument, the group argues that, quote, California could do more good as an independent country than it can do as just a U.S. state, unquote. And goes on to state there are 9 areas in which California would be better off as an independent country. So what are these supporting statements? Number 1, peace and security. Not being a part of the U.S. will make California a less likely target of retaliation by its enemies. 2, elections and government. California's electoral votes haven't affected a presidential election since 1876. Number 3, trade and regulation. The United States is dragging California into the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which conflicts with our values. Number 4, debt and taxes. Since 1987, California has been subsidizing the other states at a loss of tens and sometimes hundreds of billions of dollars in a single fiscal year. Is that comparable or similar or run parallel to the nations of NATO that haven't paid their dues? Immigration. Independence means California would be able to decide what immigration policy made sense for our diverse and unique population, culture, and economy, and that we'll be able to build an immigration system that is consistent with our values. Natural resources. Independence means we will gain control of the 46% of California that is currently owned by the US government and its agencies. The environment. I wonder if natural resources is parallel to all the federal land that cattle ranchers use to feed their cows with and don't have to pay anything for the use of federal land. The environment. As long as the other states continue debating whether or not climate change is real, they will continue holding up real efforts to reduce carbon emissions. Does that include, for one, the snowmounts and all that F-gas, ethane gas will be released into the atmosphere and also from the oceans? Does that also include that? Health and medicine. California can join the rest of the industrial world in guaranteeing health care as a universal right for all of our people. Somebody has to pay. Take a look at the United Kingdom. Listen to the complaints from England about their welfare health system. On the other hand, maybe you would also like to ask yourself why all the top political figures from all the countries from around the world always come to the United States for their health care. Have you noticed that? Education. We'll be able to fully fund public education, rebuild and modernize public schools, and pay public school teachers the salaries they deserve. Really? That's interesting. I'm sure the charter schools and the private schools may have something to say about it. However, the initiative failed. On September 10th, 2020, Yes, California initiated a new effort to collect petition signatures for California secession, which was approved by the Secretary of State, but it failed again. The elephant in the room. Can California legally secede from the Union? According to this article, California can legally secede from the United States if at least 50% of registered voters in California participate and at least 55% vote yes to secede. Then 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 38 states must ratify it. The governor of California would have been required to write to the United Nations to request its membership as a nation. The other elephant, its companion. Can a city secede from a state? Although it's never happened, some law experts say that under Article 4, Section 3 of the US Constitution, a city could petition to secede from a state with the necessary votes from Congress. Well, let's just suppose that California was a country. Would it succeed? Many believe that California's strong economy would allow it to stand alone as a country. Using World Bank figures, California would be the world's 5th largest economy between Germany and the United Kingdom, if it were an independent country. What did the Calexit poll show? In 2017, 32%. Missing the other 20%. 23%, excuse me. Bottom line is, at first you don't succeed, try again. And they're still trying. Present day arguments for California center on the state's large population and economic power. At $3.51 trillion, California's gross domestic product was larger than France's, which comes in at $2.94 trillion in 2021. Using World Bank figures, California would be the world's fifth largest economy between Germany and the United Kingdom. The state is home to 39.2 million people, and they are featured as an independent lot, particularly in relation to environmental issues. For a little back history, the Confederacy was defeated on the battlefield, not politically. However, there were subsequent legal issues created by the attempt at independence, which led the courts to express their opinion of the legality of secession. In Texas versus White, a dispute over a bond sale by the Confederate States, the Supreme Court ruled in 1869 that Texas secession had not been legal. According to the majority opinion, entry into the Union formed an indissoluble relation. It was final, perpetual, and left no place for reconsideration or revocation, except through revolution or through the consent of the states. So the Supreme Court appears to recognize the legitimacy of independence through armed struggle. The war's outcome was the deciding factor. Compared to today, yes, California is nonviolent. The consent of the states provides an opening. However, in a blog post from Marinelli, March 2016, he interprets the Supreme Court's opinion to mean that California can propose a constitutional amendment allowing it to succeed. And if it's approved by 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 38 states ratify it, California could become independent. Alternately, 2/3 of the delegates of a constitutional convention can approve the amendment, which then would have to be ratified by 38 states. However, if the Constitution is thrown out, then both California, Texas, and Florida, subsequent New England states, would have to remain in the Union. Something to think about. Now that we discussed whether or not California could secede and what would happen if they did secede, and the fact that they could be recognized as an independent country, the BBC has a different take. The article was written by Rachel Neuer, and according to her, secession is extremely impossible. But what would happen if it did happen, and would underscore and expose some hidden truths about the US? There's that big white elephant again, and where the power really lies. And she's saying it's not Washington, D.C. According to Ms. Neuer, Americans have grown polarized in recent years. According to the Pew Research Center, median Republicans are more conservative than 97% of Democrats, while median Democrats are more liberal than 95% of Republicans. By contrast, in 1994, those figures were just 64 and 70%. Some Scholars argue that ideological tensions have never been greater. And I can agree with that. We have to go back historically to something like the 1890s, post-Civil War period, to find politics in the US that are anywhere near as bitterly polarized as we have now, says Bernard Grothman, a political scientist at the University of California, Irvine. Polarization in Congress is at levels we have not seen in more than 100 years. According to Monica Toth, a professor of international politics at the Fletcher School at Tufts University in Boston, arguments in support of these plans include the belief that the federal government no longer represents California's economic interests, that the state is so large that proper governance is only possible if applied across a smaller geographic scale, or that irreconcilable differences have emerged between California and the rest of the United States and what they stand for. If they want to point that out, they can also point out that there's no one in the House or the Senate, Congress or the Senate, that represents the American people. So maybe the whole of the United States should break up into separate countries, since no one's really being represented by their elected and voted into office candidate. Californians are not akin to the Kurds in Iraq, the Catalans in Spain, or even the Scots and Irish in the UK, says Brandon O'Leary, a political science professor at the University of Pennsylvania. I cannot foresee generals from the Pentagon obeying orders to go occupy California by force. Well, they could send the federal police, and factoring Wilson's administration, when all the veterans in the 1900s camped out on Washington's land to protest how they were being treated, Wilson called out the federal troops and had them forcibly removed. Something to think about. Following California's peaceful secession, Democratic fears would come true. California is the largest state in the Union by population, and its exit would radically shift the political field in the US. The balance of power in Congress would tip toward complete Republican control, and the loss of California's electoral votes would leave little hope for the US to see another Democratic president in the near future. Democrats have depended on California since the early 1990s for having a chance to win presidential elections. Stephen Sedman. Politically, this would put Democrats in a deep, deep hole. They've depended on California since the early 1990s for having a chance to win presidential elections. In response to the red wave, remaining U.S. Democratic representatives would likely shift their politics to the right. If you no longer have California anchoring the Democratic Party positions, then that dramatically changes the center of gravity, Grothman says. For Democrats, the most optimistic outcome for a U.S. without California would be a more centrist political arena, one akin to the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower, 1953 to 1961, when bipartisan consensus allowed for major undertakings like the construction of the interstate highway system. No matter how our U.S. policies and politics shake out, losing California would deliver a significant economic blow to the newly diminished nation. California is the world's 5th largest economy, bigger than that of the entire UK, grossing $2.7 trillion in 2017. And it's now 2024. Think about it. It also contributes more tax revenue to the US federal government than any other state, subsidizing all sorts of Republican states for which it simply receives abuse in return, O'Leary says. How big would this overall impact have on our economy would depend on whether leaders struck up free trade agreements or if they imposed tariffs and other trade barriers. No matter, the U.S. would not escape unscathed. In other words, it would imperil the remaining states of the Union and foster an us versus them mentality. But we already have that mentality in the United States, us versus them. The standard rule about immigration is that whoever is already there decides that the best thing that can possibly happen is to put up barriers to anyone else coming in. Gruffman says there is no guarantee that an independent California would be an exception. Immigration, a really big flaw in anybody's argument. If California succeeds, it wouldn't necessarily kick off a mass immigration of U.S. liberals into California and an exodus of Republicans out. I'm an American in Canada, and after every election, everyone says I'm moving to Canada, but they don't, Sedman says. If California seceded, there would be some flow, but it wouldn't be as dramatic as people think, and most of it would be driven by jobs. However, the secession of California might trigger a snowball effect of similar initiatives in other parts of the U.S. Take the Northeast, for example. It would become increasingly alienated in a Republican-dominated country with no hope of winning political representation. States stretching north from Maryland to Maine and west to Pennsylvania may see secession as the only means of escaping a permanent Republican majority, which means a one-party system. Quite parallel to Russia, China, North Korea, to name a few. History has seen such dynasties play out. States such as Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova only seceded from the Soviet Union after the Baltic states led the way. In this hypothetical situation, you can imagine folks in the Northeast thinking that if DC allowed California to go scot-free, it would probably let them go too, Sedman said. Following the secession of the Northeast, Florida may opt to desert, as could parts of Texas. At that point, other states, many which have the same economic capacity and population size to become small countries of their own, may see little incentive to stick around. In other words, California's succession could be the beginning of the end of the United States of America as we know it. As Groffman says, in a world in which California succeeded, the most pessimistic scenario is further breakup of the United States. And they said it wouldn't happen here. Unless something drastic happens and changes, they believe that California is not going to succeed anytime soon. A constitutional law denies states the right to succession, and there's little evidence that the majority of California citizens actually want to leave. A 2017 survey of 1,000 Californians conducted by the University of California, Berkeley, found that a bipartisan 68% opposed such initiative. What would happen, though, if the impossible or the improbable happened? How would that upset the precious balance of power and politics in the United States? A civil war. Well, we have a former president already stating verbally, out loud to his constituents, if I don't win the election, we're going to start a civil war. You see, you don't even have to secede from the Union to start a civil war. You can use another excuse. Works just as well. The possibility of violence, even a formal war, is the first and most crucial question for hypothesizing what would happen if California tried to leave. Another U.S. Civil War may sound unlikely, but consider that the southern U.S. did not expect lasting conflict to ensue when it decided to secede from the North 157 years ago. As a nation, we've only been around 400 or 500 years. We're still very, very young, folks. Monica Toff said, "It seems unfathomable that the U.S. will have another war of succession. But I think if you talk to people in the mid-19th century, they would have said the same thing." And civil war did break out, leading to the loss of some 620,000 American lives and shaking the country. It seems that we have to take this into consideration, that it might happen, Toff says. Other splits throughout history have sparked violent reactions as well. Pakistan responded with genocide and mass rape when Bangladesh decided to become a separate nation in 1971, while Eritrea's War of Independence from Ethiopia dragged on for 30 years. Parallel to the 100-Year War with the English Civil War, white rose versus red. Doesn't always play out that way, though. Some countries have pulled off peaceful secession. In 1993, in what is known as the Velvet Divorce, the Czech Republic split from Slovakia with no resulting bloodshed. And despite the tough talk between the EU and UK, Brexit is proceeding peacefully. The question is whether the US opted to try to forcibly prevent California from leaving would depend on who was leading the country at the time and how they felt about secession, says Stephen Salmon, an international affairs professor at Calexit University in Ottawa, Canada. Republicans might actually say good riddance, whereas Democrats might say we got to keep California or we might be marginalized forever. Unlike the U.S. Civil War, there is no fundamental issue like slavery to inflame the divide. And most scholars agreed that there's just too much shared identity between California and the rest of the U.S. to imagine such a scene should war break out. O'Leary says the dollar would tank. The euro and Chinese yuan could replace it, yen could replace it as the global currency. But they're already doing that. They do not feel that the United States is such a spick and span country anymore, and they want to shift. The newly divided U.S. would lose international footing and become more beholden to its allies, and some long-standing friendships would be tested. With the U.S. leaning more strongly to the right, nations also run by right-leaning parties such as Hungary and Russia might become closer to the U.S. But relations between the U.S. and Canada, which is generally better when both nations' leaders sit on the same side of the political spectrum, would fray. So would those with Mexico, as the increasingly right-wing U.S. government shifts toward harder-line immigration policies. California, on the other hand, would become an attractive country, a new ally for those in other liberal countries. Suddenly, instead of a bipolar system with the U.S. and China, we'll see a multipolar system with the U.S., China, California, India, and so on, Sedman says. In international relations, multipolar systems produce a lot more confusion because alliances matter a lot more. And as California vies for a high standing within the international community, it would likely take a lead on key issues such as mitigating global warming. California's progress, however, would be counterbalanced by the U.S. continued backsliding, including its loosening of emissions and pollution standards defunding of initiatives to develop sustainable energy, and opening up of carbon capturing wilderness areas for prospecting and development. And that's exactly what the U.S. is worrying about right now within its political system between the Republicans and the Democrats. Never gets old, does it? California could also be more attractive to the immigrants. The newly formed country would certainly continue to welcome overseas innovators to Silicon Valley and its space agency, but it might also relax policies for less skilled workers. Given the sheer scale of Hispanic populations in California and the role of agriculture there, I can't imagine that California would not wish to develop a new policy on the question of welcoming people from Central America and elsewhere, O'Leary says. Also, on the other hand, a highly diverse Southern California might look favorably on immigration more than a conservative Northern California could staunchly opposed. If you look at maps of the last election, there are deep sockets of red and blue and areas in between, Toff says. It's not inevitable that California is liberal. Rothman adds that as humans, we're naturally inclined to view the world as a zero-sum game. People tend to believe that adding new people will simply divide the pie in more ways. In other words, anything you get, I lose. And we already have that mentality. And it's just not with immigration either. Though economics have shown time and time again that growth creates positive sum benefits, Californians with their newly established borders may fail to subject the onslaught of people who are immigrating into their country, i.e. the Hispanics, from Mexico, Central America, and of course, South America. You can listen to California Secession, Calexit, Calexit, all over again on youtube.com/PWR network _PW Talk Radio, on passionateworldtalkradio.com. Check out the blog, and it will provide you links to where you need to go. Also, you can hear it on social media, facebook.com/Passionate World Radio Network, on Instagram, Passionate World Radio, on Twitter, PWTR, and 17 other podcast directories, including iTunes, Spreaker, Instagram, Tumblr. So go check us out. I want to thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Next week, we're going to talk about gun violence among our U.S. population and just exactly where the National Rifle Association stands, or is it now kneeling, and how other people, other countries feel about the United States and our concealed carrying weapons, which can also apply to little boys of 10 years old who have already been given guns in New Hampshire to go out target practicing before they shoot their first deer. So thank you very much. If you have a subject you want to address, a topic, please text us at 484-364-1032 or email us at pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening, and remember, please keep listening. Thank you.